Thank you very much, Chair, and I'm honoured to moderate this roundtable discussion on population dynamics, sustainable development and climate change. Now we have with us four very distinguished panellists, so please allow me to introduce them. First we have His Excellency Laisa Bulatale, who is a Minister from the Ministry of Social Development and Human Security in Thailand. Then we have Laisa Bulatale, who is the Team Leader for Gender and Transitional Justice Programme at the Fiji Women's Rights Movement. Then we have John Wilmoth, who is Director of the Population Division in the UN Department of Social and Economic Affairs. And then at the end, Sadekshya Aryal, who is the co-founder of Himalayan Innovations in Nepal. Now we have around 40 minutes for the discussion, and each panellist will have 8 minutes in total to respond to 2 rounds of questions. And again, Chair, as you said, I say back, I'd appreciate it if we stick to our time so we can get through as much as possible. And then after the panel discussion, as the Chair mentioned, I will open the floor for questions and answers and statements from online participants. So the Asian and Pacific Ministerial Declaration on Population and Development emphasises that population dynamics are all important for development. Understanding these population dynamics and their causes and consequences is a crucial first step in adapting to new and continuing challenges, while also maximising demographic opportunities within the ICPD framework. However, as we heard yesterday, in many country statements, especially from the Pacific region, other factors such as inequality, urbanisation, digital transformation, and of course, climate change and increased frequency of natural disasters mediate the relationship between population development, often in a cumulative manner. So in this context, therefore, my honour to moderate this roundtable, which will discuss population dynamics in Asia and the Pacific, and the link to socio-economic development, sustainable development, and climate change. So I'll begin, Your Excellency. So Thailand has undergone a remarkable demographic transition leading to low replacement fertility and rapid population age. At the same time, many people, including older persons, do not have social protection and work in the informal sector. So as the Minister of Social Development and Human Security in Thailand, what are your strategies in addressing population ageing, low fertility and the social protection gap?
Thank you, Stuart. Also, I'd like to thank the ESCAP and UNFPA for organising this extraordinary conference every 10 years. And especially thank you, Stuart, for such a detailed research you've been doing on Thailand. It was wonderful and it was a very good data for us to work on. Now, touching on the aging population, Thailand is actually, as I mentioned yesterday in opening, we are an aged society and we are approaching a super aged society in the timeline of less than a decade from now. And I must say that, well, there's also a silver lining. Well, for one, at the moment we have a very low birth rate. Last year is about less than 400,000 newborn babies in Thailand. And as such, in the very near future, the workforce in Thailand is going to be concentrated around the age, the senior people, the older people. Now, what we are planning to do is that we have to make sure that we have an active aging. We have to make sure that our senior people are more active as they get older. Now, there are 2 benefits from that. One, of course, we get their experiences, their wisdom, when we introduce them back to workforce. But mind you, we are not forcing them to work, but we are trying to utilize their experiences and knowledge and their ability. And by keeping them busy, well, we will keep them from being attacked by diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's diseases, keep them active. So it's like kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Keep them active, we get the productivity, and we prevent them from being the burden of the society with all the diseases. Now, when we're talking about the low fertility rate, in Thailand, the government, the cabinet, we talk about how to increase the number of newborn babies in Thailand. Well, the process of increasing the babies is not that hard. Everyone knows how it's done. But the problem is how to actually encourage the newer generations to have families. As for Thailand, we have generation baby boomers, the silent generation, baby boomers, Gen X like myself, Gen Y, Gen Z, and even Gen Alpha. Now, in the generation X and baby boomers, me and the older people, we view family as a source of power. We have a whole day of work, we are tired, we're worn out, we come home and we recharge ourselves. So a family is like an energy source, like a power bank. We come home and we plug ourselves in the morning we go back out there again, we get recharged. But unfortunately, with the newer generations, Gen Y, Gen Z, and Gen Alpha, they look at the family as a burden. The cost of living is getting more and more expensive. The society is full of events that we would like to see happening. Disasters, climate change, etc., etc. Pollutions as one of them, biodiversity loss, for example. And they don't want to have babies because they feel that it's unsecure for them to raise newborn babies, and as well as the fact that it's so expensive. They can't even take care of themselves, let alone having a wife and kids or a kid. So we have to change that mentality to increase the fertility. We need to make an atmosphere to create a society where they feel safe in bringing up the newborn. We have to create a society where they feel that they will be supported. At the moment, the government, under our ministry of MSDHS, we are giving out grants for newborn babies from 0 until 6 years old. We have a monthly subsidy. They have to be able to feel that they have adequate education, quality education, so that all aspects of the cabinet has to work together. Now, with that's how to solve the question of the newborn babies. Even legislation-wise, gender equality, and how Thailand would tackle all the social problems. At the moment, the Ministry of Social Development and Human Security of Thailand, we are working tirelessly, despite the fact that I just assumed this position about 2 months ago, but my staffs have been working for as long as I remembered. And we are tackling every single aspect of the society. Of course, it's when we deal with a social problem, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. It's a very extremely tailor-made on an individual basis. So it's not the easiest task for my staff to solve it in one day. Rome wasn't built in a day, and thus social problem needs to be tackled one problem at a time. And the next step for Thailand, well, not just Thailand, I think, but for the region, is to make sure that we have a stronger welfare policy, so that the newer generation feels that it's safe for them. They have support from all sides to raise a new family, and by having more newborn babies, the problem of the aging society, the age society, or even a super age society would eventually be balanced out with the increasing number of newborn babies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Demographic trends in the Pacific and how they are influencing and being influenced by climate change.
Good morning. So I represent the Fiji Women's Rights Movement. The Fiji Women's Rights Movement is a national feminist organization in Fiji that was established in 1986. It's committed to removing all forms of discrimination against women and girls through institutional reform and attitudinal change. Our vision is that we hope that one day we can close our office, because all forms of discrimination and violence against women in Fiji would have been eradicated. But until then, our work remains and our doors remain open. I think to answer the question, one of the things is, and I have 2 points, there's a wealth of research that's showing that people and families and communities will need to migrate because of sea level rise, saltwater erosion, and if floods continue, and if there's no fish in the sea. And earlier this year, we convened for the 3rd Pacific Feminist Forum, where we brought together 150 Pacific feminists, climate change and human rights activists, and these were the concerns that they also raised. And this then begs the question whether island states have the capacity, the resource, and literally the space to be able to provide populations that are moving whether internally or whether they're moving cross-border. And what are the human rights safeguards for climate change refugees when they relocate to another country? We think that more work needs to be made to be able to understand the migration trends across border and how that's impacted by climate change, and then what are the potential implications in terms of policy, law, and program interventions for countries. And I guess it doesn't help when you have gender-neutral laws and policies and programs in place, because then you don't actually get to the root cause of what the issue is to be able to have more targeted interventions when you are developing those policies and programs. And the other thing that I think that's also what we see in terms of demographic trends and what the Pacific Feminist Forum and the activists have been saying is there's a direct link in the change of environment and how that impacts women's bodily autonomy, and how that's impacting all SRHR outcomes for women. And there's a high chance of women being left behind when you don't look at those interlinkages. And the progress for that in the Pacific has been stifled with weak political commitment, and to be honest, inadequate resourcing, persistent discrimination against women and girls, and then the unwillingness to address or to even talk about sexuality because of the whole notion of taboo. And then again, when you have gender neutrality in the laws and policies that you are implementing, then it becomes a bit harder for you to be able to have more targeted approach, and I think I'm repeating myself there. And so at the backdrop of all of this as well is the high rates of gender-based violence in the Pacific, and we see that across through data sets from UN agencies that do these types of work. And then you also have poverty, and then you have very few women in leadership. There's also elements of cultural and religious fundamentalism where there's no discussion about SRHR needs because again, it's something that's considered taboo. And then if you look at healthcare systems, and I think in the Pacific Islands, our healthcare system during the COVID-19 pandemic really showed the vulnerability that, and how it was hanging on a thread. And how you see that now in terms of how Pacific Island countries are trying to get back to providing healthcare services to its citizens. And then with the rise and resurgence of different types of diseases thought to be under control, and when COVID-19 came, it kind of put that all at the setback. And then if you look at vulnerability, you look at Pacific women and girls with disabilities who continue to be left behind when you don't look at interlinkages as well. And then this leads to discriminations in different other areas, and I guess I could go on and on about this. So those are my 2 points for, I guess, an island.
Thank you very much indeed, Laisa. Turning to Nepal now, so Sadekshya Aryal. Given your work on environmental protection, climate adaptation, women's empowerment and technology, what would you say are the main challenges faced by younger generations in rural areas of the Global South when navigating these issues?
Thank you for the question. I think the main challenges for the younger generation is the allure of the city, its people and the services. Whether that allure is a reality or a mirage, young people fall for it. The youths are now are those groups that are majorly connected everywhere in this world, and they face this fear of missing out, the FOMO, missing out of living a life that everyone else does, and this fear makes them believe that staying back in rural villages or rural areas hinders their progress, their careers, their education, whether they will be backward compared to others. I think it's the fear of missing out that has hugely affected the younger generation and their struggle in life, and also this affects in their contribution towards working to safeguard the effects of climate, working to tackle the effects of climate change. And apart from that, young people, they as a result of which they trade their culture, their family values, and they trade the support of the elder family members for the promise of success in the city, which many people don't get. And they get into these kind of jobs that has zero prospects of upward mobility. So instead of their growth, it changes into a survival battle, I feel. And despite these many younger generations, they are doing their best to contribute to help tackle against effects of climate change. Back in Nepal, I am working through my initiative Girls for Rurals with 1,060 young girls, young skilled girls who are there in their own community in the rural areas, and they work with me to advocate on gender inclusive energy uses and in promoting the renewable energy technologies for the production of agriculture, in actually making the women in rural areas believe that they can actually have a value proposition of the very products they produce if they are environmental friendly. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So now we go round to the second round of questions. So if I can begin with you again, Minister. Welcome to the world of social development. I'm very glad that you've joined us. Wonderful world of social development. But of course you were formerly Minister of Natural Resources and the Environment. I know that you're still very much engaged in these environmental issues. And of course this relationship between population and the environment is a very important one. So could you perhaps share some specific policies or programmes which have been important or successful in integrating this population dimension in our efforts to reduce the human footprint on the environment?
Thank you, Stuart. Well, as you mentioned, my previous post was with the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment of Thailand. And I think I'm one of the luckiest ministers because under the umbrella of sustainability, we have the climate change. And under the climate change, there are two very, very important branches. One is the mitigation, of how to mitigate the effect, also the carbon footprint, etc., etc. And the other branch, which is equally important, is the adaptation. And the adaptation is what the Ministry of Social Development and Human Security is directly responsible for. Now it's funny the fact that Thailand is trying to increase our newborn babies, like I mentioned in the first round. We want to have more newborn babies, we want to have more population. But unfortunately, the more number of humans exist on Earth, the more carbon footprint we are going to produce. It is undeniable that wherever humans exist, well, the kind of disasters and catastrophes and all these rubbish and pollution will follow, because at the moment, I'm sure everyone knows that the triple planetary crises is pollution, climate change, and eventually leads to the biodiversity loss. At the moment, we are trying to prevent the climate change part so that we don't get to the final wave, which would certainly wipe out mankind from the surface of the earth, which is the biodiversity loss. Julia Roberts once mentioned in her video message on Mother Earth, she said, your action will determine your fate. And she also said, nature doesn't need people, but we, the people, need Mother Nature. So I think it's really time we really step forward. In Thailand, well, I've attended a number of COPs, COP 24th, 25th, 26th, and the 27th. And Thailand has made a lot of promises and development. We announced our carbon neutrality to be in the year 2050. Our net zero greenhouse gas emission would be in 2065. Now we do walk the talk. We promise something and we actually deliver on our promises. For example, last year, the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment, we signed an agreement with Swiss counterpart
under the Article 6.2 of the Paris Agreement, where we actually transfer the carbon credit between Thailand and Switzerland. We were back then one of the first couple in the world to actually execute something under Article 6.2 of the Paris Agreement. And as a result of the carbon credit exchange, an e-bus, public buses in Bangkok, is, as we speak, under the transformation from the internal combustion engine to 100% electric vehicles. There are almost 5,000 buses in Bangkok alone, and it is undergoing the transformation as we speak. Other projects, significant ones, is, for example, we are trying to change the way our farmers in Thailand conduct their day-to-day businesses. Thailand is famous for rice growing. We have a tremendous amount of rice paddies in Thailand, over half of the area in our countries. And by growing rice, there are tremendous amount of methane, the greenhouse gas. Methane, if anyone, I'm sure many of us knows, is about 28 times more destructive than carbon dioxide. So 1 ton of methane is about 28 tons of carbon dioxide. And the process of growing rice, by having water in the rice paddy for the whole entire crop of 3 or 4 months, the amount of methane gas emits from that process is tremendous. We are trying to reduce that by introducing a new way. It's called alternate wet and dry. When the rice grain started to grow, we drained the entire rice paddy from water. And some people would be curious whether the rice will survive without water, but in fact, it actually flourished better. We get more productivity, more yield per area of growing the rice. And by doing so, we use less water, we use less energy in growing rice, we get more yield per unit of growing, and most important of all, we reduce the amount of methane emitted by about 70%. And that is transferred into, translated into carbon credit. So in my hometown, about an hour up north from where we are at the moment, it's called Suphanburi, a group of farmers actually using that technique right now and get additional income, not from the increase in yield, but from the selling of the carbon credits. Per year, they actually can sell the carbon credits, and it's actually happening in Thailand. So this is one of a very important project that Thailand is undergoing under the agricultural sector. Also, back to my current job at the Ministry of Social Development and Human Security, we are seeking and also receiving financial and technical support from the GEF, which is a global environmental fund, thanks to Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment, who's the focal point for Thailand. And last month, I asked my permanent secretary and all the staff and the senior officials at the ministry to go and visit the senior officials at the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment so they can exchange that knowledge. Each ministry would need to know the implications, what will happen if one doesn't happen. It's not like a chicken and egg, it has to go hands in hands, because economic development that Thailand has achieved over the last decades, it comes at the price of pollutions, of climate, of droughts, of floods. Mother Nature is getting angrier and angrier every day. So all the ministries, we have to chip in, and Thailand is, we are ready to work with all our partners, both near and afar, whether in Europe, across the other side of the world, in the US, everywhere, in Asia even. And we are one of the 4 leaders in ASEAN that is addressing the problem of the climate change and sustainability.
Thank you very much. So before we turn to the CSO questions and statements, I'd just quickly like to, unless there are any other questions to the panel. No, in that case, I would just like to firstly ask the Minister to respond to the question from the distinguished delegate from Bangladesh relating to climate change and carbon credits. And then following that, if it's okay, I saw the linkage between the distinguished delegate from the Timor-Leste's question about gender and fertility
aspect is included, should be included in policy development. That's okay. Thank you, Stuart, and thank you for the question from the distinguished delegate from Bangladesh. I think the question is about the mitigation effort and how to reduce the effect of climate change through commercializing things like carbon credit would really help the global situation as a whole. I must admit that a 1,000 miles journey starts with the first step. Of course, by buying and selling carbon credits, now there is a new term coming out, everyone's talking about it, greenwashing things. I believe at least it's an effort to try to do something. Various regions in the world, for example, like in the European Union, a non-tariff barriers measures is coming out, like the CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. It will be imposed on products that will enter into the EU. Well, currently it only covers about 6 to 8 products like cement, fertilizers, irons, aluminium, etc., etc. And the cost of doing your businesses, if you're not prepared to shift your production line and reduce your carbon footprint, then the cost of your business is going to go up and up in such a way that eventually you will not be able to sustain business. Now, of course, by the end of the day, the commercializing aspect of in order to combat climate change will help to a certain degree. But the real fundamental change has to come from the mentality, the shifting and the change in the paradigm, the way people think, the way people act, the way people, like the distinguished delegates from Russia just mentioned, it's the way of life and the way people have to change in order to combat the climate change, because at the end, it's not the business side that's going to punish you, it's Mother Nature. She doesn't really care if you're European, if you're Asian, if you're in opposition, if you're government, or if you're rich or poor. Mother Nature is very fair. She hits everyone, and so I think it's a matter of fact that all mankind, being the developing countries or the fully developed countries, and one needs to really help one another. The one who can afford it, like in Europe, needs to support countries through the loss and damage fund that they're discussing in COP27 last year in Sharm el-Sheikh. So I think everything has to go hand in hand, because at the end of the day, Mother Nature doesn't really care if it's business or not. She'll just hit it anyway.
I strongly believe that if we're talking about fertility, we're talking about SRHR, it has to include women. So if your fertility plans in your own country, you're thinking of things to do and approaches to take, it has to include women and women's voices, because those are the interventions and those are the programs that women will access. And so from a women's rights perspective, I'd always say, I think I alluded to it earlier in my statement, is include women's voices and their realities in the types of interventions and the programs that you're implementing in country. Because the fertility plans and the fertility approaches that you're taking, or anything to do with SRHR in general, includes women. And another thing that I always stress is context. In the Pacific Island region, we have our social norms, we have our religious and cultural norms, and that underpins whether women are able to access SRHR services, whether they're able to negotiate between their partners on what type of SRHR needs they need. And in the work that we've done at the Human Rights Movement, we've had like instances where the men at national consultations say to government delegations that come to the islands for consultation, why are the women accessing contraceptive without our permission? That is women's bodily autonomy. They should be able to make those decisions for themselves. So understanding context when you're developing those strategies in countries, and when you're developing those policies and laws in country, understand where women are at. Because if you don't, then whatever interventions that you're making in country will not work.